Welcome to Commander Central, episode 196, and today we'll be taking a look at a listener Alex Cook's Trostani Selesnya voice zombie token deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
That was indeed a question I asked in the beginning, since that's a pretty strange thing to do in Selesnya, but we will get back to that in a few minutes here. Max, how you doing?
Pretty good, still staying home, staying safe.
Same here.
I got to see your beautiful face for 30 seconds this weekend when you dropped some stuff off for me.
And then picked up some playmats so I can do my portion of signing them, and then we'll get them over to Chris, and eventually they will make their way out once they are appropriately quarantined at each person's house and we can get them shipped. So
right.
It'll be a process, but we'll get them going.
Yep.
I actually got to play some games this weekend, which was kind of nice. Fired up some papered EDH online with local friend Dr. Mike and Dan Kraus, patron supporter and past guest, as well as supporter, I think she goes by Sheepy Cutie on Twitter. So we had all four of us in a game, and I think we played 3 games on Saturday night. So that was fun. It's nice just to actually play some Magic again. And we had a couple of good commander type things happen that I will quick mention. At one point, Dan dropped a Fiendish Duo, which is a creature that was in, I think, the Game Nights little add-on that came out. And Fiendish Duo, for those that don't remember, is just a devil creature that when a source would deal damage to an opponent, it deals double that damage to that player instead. So Dan played that and passed his turn to I think it was Dr. Mike, who was next, who only had a 3/3 Owl in play. And this was early in the game. We're talking like turn 6, I think, turn 5 maybe. And Dan wound up casting Fractured Identity, which destroys a creature and gives everyone else a token copy of that creature. And he destroyed the Fiendish Duo and gave all of us
oh no
a Fiendish Duo. But I had Anointed Procession out.
So you got 2.
So I got 2 of them. And then he swung at Dan with the 3/3 Owl.
Which was a lot of damage. Which
Mike's Fiendish Duo turned into a 6/6. And then Megan's made it a 12/12. And then it went to me, where it became a 24/24, then a 48/48. So Dan got one shot by this 3/3 Owl because of the Fiendish Duo he played.
Very nice.
That was just the most perfect EDH play.
Oh,
where
for sure.
You drop that card and think that, you are going to be in a great position. And then the dumbest card, Fractured Identity, winds up killing you because everyone gets a copy of it.
That card, I've seen Dr. Mike do a lot of work with in the games I've played against him.
I mean, it's so chaotic, but it was also like everyone couldn't help but just be laughing madly the whole time because it was such a ridiculous sequence of plays. And so it was just nice to play again. I just really needed that on Saturday to blow off some steam and play some fun games. And I have played some EDH Rec cast games, so it's not like I haven't got any games in, but we were streaming those. It's a little bit different. You're trying to make sure you're a little bit entertaining at least. And this was just no pressure, just playing some Commander. And I needed to do that on Saturday, so that felt good. And we're going to try to get you in some games here, hopefully, Max.
Hopefully. You did drop off a camera, so I will be working this week after work each night to try to get a proper setup so it doesn't flop around. Even if it's just like a cardboard box that you use you don't need anything too fancy. You can rig up something pretty easily. I think I have a tripod for my camera, but I haven't been real happy with it. And what I wound up doing on Saturday was I just stacked up some books on top of my desk and had the tripod, instead of as a tripod, I was using it just as a way to lean off the stack of books for the camera to point straight down. So it was a pretty ridiculous setup too. So you don't need anything too fancy. Just as long as you have a camera, you can kind of figure it out. We also got a ban last night. See, we're recording this on Monday, and this will air on Thursday. So at this point in time, it's been out for 4 days now. The Rules Committee banned Flash in Commander. Yes, they did.
So, do you have any thoughts on that? I don't think it's that exciting of a ban for anybody really who doesn't play CEDH, but for us. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts at all.
I'm not surprised it finally happened.
Yeah, nor am I. We had done a thing, I think Shivam posted on Twitter over the weekend. If anyone had any guesses about what was the announcement, and I had said, if there's a ban, I feel like it was going to be Flash, and it was Flash.
Yeah.
So CEDH, it was a problem, I get it, and it winds up being kind of convenient because it saw very little play outside of that. Have you ever seen a Flash actually cast in a game?
Nope.
I have once, and I don't even remember what deck it was, and it wasn't a Flash Hulk. It was somebody who ran it because they wanted to be able to cast their commander at instant speed on occasion. I don't even remember what the commander was. So that was it. And it was not a broken play, but it was also like that deck will survive just fine without Flash. So it's a ban. It happened. It was probably due. It'll make some CDH folk happy. And I think that's kind of all I have to say about it.
Good enough for me.
If you would like to reach out to us and say hi, talk about some games that you played, tell us your thoughts on Flash being banned, how'd you do that, Max?
Head over to Twitter. You can find us at CMDR Central. We are on Facebook searching CMDR Central. And you can find each episode every week, or sometimes twice a week, over at youtube.com searching CMDR Central.
You can also find us on patreon.com.
Yeah, head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central to check out our reward tiers if you are so inclined to support us financially. One of those being the Decks You Play series, which we'll be getting to shortly.
Yes, indeed. Shortly as in...
now.
Let's just talk about it right now. So why don't you tell us what Alex has to say about his deck, Max?
Yep. So Alex answered our typical questions. He said his meta depends. Recently, he's been playing a lot over webcam on a few different Discords, so his decks attempt to be versatile enough to handle the unknown. The goal of the deck is surprising people when I say he has a Selesnya zombie build, and that the shock on his opponent's faces when it actually does well. The weaknesses of the deck are because he's trying to he only has a few different ways to make zombies. Some of the games end up without all the pieces coming together, so without adding more tutors, he would love any ideas we have on how to better assemble the pieces needed. And he's also not sure the token doublers in the deck are needed, and they actually feel a bit win more-ish. And for a budget, he said, short of ABUR duels, the sky's the limit.
Okay. Well, this one was tricky, kind of for the reasons he said. The deck is so specific, Selesnya zombies.
Yes.
Would be a bit like my Zero deck being handed to somebody to look at and like give me some suggestions for. There's just only so many things you can do with mono white planeswalkers. There's only so many things you can do with Selesnya zombies that he's kind of got this deck in the shape it can be in to still be a Selesnya zombie deck. So we'll probably do this one a little bit more than we usually do as a show and tell, and just talk about it because there's just a finite amount of suggestions you can make without changing the face of the deck.
Yeah.
So first things first, the commander is Trostani, Selesnya's Voice, 4 mana, and that's double green, double white. For a legendary creature Dryad who is a 2/5, whenever another creature enters battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. And you can also spend 1 in Selesnya, so 3 total, to tap Trostani and populate, which creates a token that's a copy of a creature token you control. So there is a good bit of creatures ETBing because it isn't a cast trigger for Trostani. So there's creatures ETB, so it is a logical commander in that regard, and you're making zombie tokens, so that populate ability isn't being wasted here either. If you're playing Selesnya zombies, this is a good commander for it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to pad your life totem by dropping the bodies to help maybe until you can get those pieces to really make the deck turn out onto the battlefield.
Yeah. So let's jump over to the land base first here, Max.
So there are 38 lands in the deck. We have a bunch of fetches, a bunch of shocks. We have the Battle for Zendikar lands. We have the Battle Bond land, along with some colorless lands like Evolving Wilds, Hall of Heliod's Generosity to return some stuff from the graveyard, and Field of the Dead is probably the most important land in this deck, as it's one of the few ways that zombies are actually created in the deck.
Right. The reason Selesnya Zombies is tricky isn't because Selesnya is bad at dealing with tokens. It just doesn't have access to zombies, really.
And the few zombies it does have, besides the 2 God Eternals, don't make tokens. They're just little, 1/2 bodies, 1/3 bodies that are draft chaff, apparently, essentially.
So Field of the Dead is a big part here, and that's why there's 2 snow-covered basics in here, too, to make it easier to hit Field of the Dead. And that's probably, I'm assuming, why there's a bunch of fetch lands here as well, so you can get those landfall triggers, essentially, of lands with different names. So Field of the Dead is a really important part of the deck, and really the only suggestion I have here in the land field, because I think it looks like a good mana base, is what I would probably run roughly here as well, is Petrified Field is an old card from Odyssey, and it taps for a colorless, so it isn't ever dead. It's not one of those lands that doesn't do anything. But it has an ability where you tap it and sacrifice Petrified Field to return target land card from your graveyard to your hand. So it gives you one more land that has a different name. Not that this deck is really suffering for that, but it does still interact with your Field of the Dead. and it gives you one more way to bring back Field of the Dead if someone destroys it, or if it gets milled, or, you know, you're forced to discard it or something. It's just one more way to bring that land back. That's such an important part of this deck. And really, worst case scenario, let's say you have Field of the Dead out, it gives you a way to bring a land back to your hand to replay it if you're really in a pinch and need the landfall to get a zombie out, and Field of the Dead's there. You can just sack it to bring a land to hand and make your land play for the turn if for some reason you didn't have a land in hand to do that. So that's, you know, fairly minor, but like it does have some utility outside of just recurring your Field of the Dead. Did you have anything here for lands you wanted to point out or talk about really at all, Max?
No, you know, I like this land base. It's a little higher than I would typically run in a 2-color deck, but because it really revolves around Field of the Dead, the more lands, the better.
Yeah, and there's a couple things I'll mention. Like, Strip Mine is generally a better land removal land than Ghost Quarter. However, this is a deck where if you need to, you can use that Ghost Quarter to get another landfall trigger for your Field of the Dead. So, like, Ghost Quarter does make sense here. I thought I would quick point that one out. And Hall of Helia Generosity is a card that I'm finding myself wanting to run in almost all of my white decks at this point. And I don't know why that is. I feel like I have, you know, plenty of blue decks, and of course they almost all have artifacts, but I look at my artifact suite in most of my blue decks outside of Vela, and I never feel like I want to run Academy Ruins, because for the most part it's mana rocks, and I don't ever feel like, hey, if someone pulls up my Soul Ring, do I need to put it back top of my library and get it back into play? No, I never, that isn't something that ever feels like an important play to me. In almost all of my white decks, the enchantments I run, even outside my Enchantress deck, even if it's like 6 enchantments, I feel like they're all really, really, really good. And I feel like Hall of Helia Generosity has become the kind of card that is almost worth having in at least all of my white decks, because the enchantments are so strong, the ability to recur them is worth having there. If you notice that at all, Max, or have you had any experience with that?
I run it currently in 2 of my 4 decks that have white in it. I run it in Dromoka and Tuvasa. Tuvasa is kind of a given. But Dromoka, it's come in handy to return stuff like a Mirari's Wake or a True Conviction. Sure. So I think it depends on how important the enchantments you run in your deck are to you. Like in Dromoka, I can win with creature beats, but True Conviction just makes it that much easier.
You bet. And like, I don't even, off the top of my head, I'm not sure I don't remember what enchantments are all in your Ragnar Krav deck, but like, I'm fairly sure there's a Bitter Blossom in there.
Yep.
And is there a Catherine's Crusade in that deck?
There is not, but Blood Bond.
Blood Bond, there we go. Like, there, even in that deck, you probably, it wouldn't ever feel like a bad card to draw.
Right.
So, yeah, that's really, not that we were down on it. Like, I think we were all really excited to see it when we did the review, when it was first revealed. We, you know, I had nothing but good things to say about it, but it's a card I've just liked more and more as the time has passed since then. I think that's really all we have to say about the land base here. It looks good. I mean, you could, like, Terramorphic Expanse. There's probably an argument to be made that something like Fabled Passage is slightly better, maybe.
Right. Price point.
It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I don't think it's that big of a deal, particularly if it's going to cost you $20 more.
Right.
All right. Where should we go next, Max?
The lonely single artifact in the deck.
Sure. Okay.
So there is one artifact, and it is Cloudstone Curio. For those who don't know, it's 3 mana for an artifact. Whenever a non-artifact permanent comes into play under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a type with it to its owner's hand.
So you mentioned actually off the air before we started recording that you thought this might have been a Karametra deck at one point.
Yeah, as we go through the list, there's a bunch of creatures that you typically see in a Karametra God of Harvest deck. You know, big land base, a bunch of creatures that bounce other things back to your hand just so you can get that recurring value of getting all your lands onto the battlefield. So Cloudstone Curio is just another way to enable that chain Karametra decks are looking for.
Yeah, and this very much does feel like a Karametra style card that you do see in that deck, but it does make sense here, particularly, you know, if you happen to have one of your very important zombie makers out, which is God Eternal Ketra. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token, the ability to just get a little extra value out of a creature you do cast by bouncing it back into your hand, or then a zombie comes into play and you can bounce a relatively cheap creature back and recast it. It is a way to generate some pretty decent extra value in this deck, particularly with the interaction between a Ketra and anything, or a Field of the Dead and Oketra. Yeah, I like it. I think this is a good deck for it. Are there any artifacts you would add? There's no Soul Ring here. You mentioned the Soul artifact in the deck. That means there's no Soul Ring.
There is no Soul Ring, which makes sense. I mean, Trostani, although I'm not sure how integral to the deck it is, doesn't have any colorless mana pips in its cost, so I think your opening hand, you're really looking for the double green, double white. Later game, the Soul Ring will probably come in handy, or trying to cast some of your other creatures, but...
I think I would run Soul Ring anyway. There's plenty of things with colorless mana costs here, but also I'm not gonna, if someone's doing it because they're trying to like show they don't have to, I get that too.
Right.
The one artifact I thought about maybe is Crucible of Worlds. There is a Renadeb Excavator in here under creatures. Crucible, for the same exact reason I mentioned Petrified Field, it's just one more way to get back your Field of the Dead if it gets destroyed or gets milled or something. But beyond that, you mentioned the fetch lands in the deck. There are 11 other lands that you could just bring back for value in this deck. Arid Mesa, Emergent Zone, Evolving Wilds, Flooded Strand, Ghost Quarter, Corrosive Verge, Marsh Flats, Expanse, Windswept Heath, and Wooded Foothills. That's at 1/10 of your deck, more than that even actually. 1/11 of your deck are cards that you can recur if you have a Crucible of Worlds out, and it's not just recurring for value. If you have Field of the Dead out and you can, use that fetch land for your land play for a turn, it's going to make you a zombie, and then you crack it to go get a land, and that comes into play and is going to make you a zombie. So I would be very tempted to put Crucible in here, since you're not going to probably be seeing Excavator every game. It's just one more opportunity to recur some of those lands.
Yeah.
That's all I have for artifacts.
I have one.
Okay, what do you got?
This plays off of the life gain from Trostani, and it might be win more. It might just be one of my favorite cards, but Aetherflux Reservoir. When you're dropping bodies as quick as this deck probably does in the late game, your life total is going to go up pretty quick, and then boom, you can Death Star someone out of the game.
And it's a backup plan. I mean, worst case, if you get your life total, up to 60 or something with playing a bunch of zombies, and then someone board wipes, you're like, okay, well, I got to, rebuild this whole army, and then you top deck Reservoir, you're like, oh, or I can just kill somebody now.
Right. And the big thing is that Oketra makes 4/4 zombies, not your typical 2/2 zombies. So that's going to go up much faster than normal.
Especially if you get in one of those loops where Oketra's out and you're starting to be able to bounce off with Curio and
cast, and
there's probably turns where you're very frequently going to easily gain 20 plus life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a reasonable include as well. All right, Max, since you went to artifacts, I'm going to jump over to the other category here where there's exactly one card, Planeswalkers.
Okay, then. And
the only Planeswalker in this deck is Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, and it is specifically the zombie art. And this really doesn't necessarily interact at all with zombies in any way, but it's zombie art, so I can respect that if you're running it just for theme. This is the Gideon, his +1. He becomes a 5/5 human ally soldier creature. His 0 puts a 2/2 white Knight ally on the battlefield, and he gets an emblem. Creatures you control get -1/-1. So I guess, I shouldn't say it doesn't interact. Being able to just spend 4 mana to get an emblem that buffs your zombies that can't ever be removed, essentially, isn't bad. But having the zombie art's pretty sweet too.
Yeah, I'm sure this is in here for it's on theme, it's zombie Gideon.
Yes.
But the primary reason is probably the emblem, and then maybe the 2/2 core tokens that it makes.
Yeah.
Or the ally tokens, I should say.
Just put some bodies in the way, worst case.
Yeah. If he's using it for strictly the anthem, I would rather run something like Intangible Virtue, because it's half the cost and it gives all your tokens +1/+1 in vigilance.
Yeah.
But I get it's on theme, so I approve.
Yeah, zombie art is pretty sweet. Max, back to you. Where are we going next?
Oh, let's head over to the enchantments.
Okay.
So we have 11 enchantments, and 3 of them are technically enchantment creatures, so those will be talked about probably in both slots.
Yes.
So we have Allurin, Anointed Procession, Concordant Crossroads, Darksteel Mutation, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Glare Subdual, Karametri God of Harvest, Kenris Transformation, Mirari's Wake, Nylea God of the Hunt, and Parallel Lives.
So a couple of these are just removal spells. Darksteel Mutation and Kenris Transformation are just ways to lock someone's creature or commander down, make it functionally useless, and keep them from recasting it too, which is really important these days when you're dealing with something like Korvald, although the Korvald usually has a sack outlet, or Tulane, where they can just generate so much value that recasting them becomes trivial. Sometimes the best way to deal with them is to just turn them into functionally a 3/3 elk that does nothing and have them sit there. I'm a fan of both those cards. Glad to see them here. Anointed Procession and Parallel Lives are the 2 token doublers that were mentioned, and they're just a green and a white version of the same thing, where if an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many tokens onto the battlefield instead. So one of the things Alex mentioned is he asked if the doublers were needed, it might have been win more. What are your thoughts on that?
Looking at the deck, and I always kind of think worst case scenario, if your zombie producers get taken offline somehow, I don't think these are win more. These are also going to, make tokens off of, anything else that can make a token in this deck. Off the Gideon. But I kind of understand, since they only really interact with 3 cards in the deck, maybe they don't fit well, but I think that's just because the theme is so tight that, there's only a few cards that make zombie tokens in these colors.
Yeah.
I would keep them just because games have to end.
Sometimes win more is actually just win exactly enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to have that thing that pushes you over the top, even if it feels extraneous. And you're like, well, I killed that person with 14 extra damage that I didn't need, but you don't know that they didn't have a Swords to Plowshares in hand or, a way to remove 2 creatures mid-attack, and they just didn't bother to do it because you were hitting them so hard that it didn't, it would have reduced the damage down to killing them by 8 instead of killing them by 14 or something. But had you not had twice as many tokens, they could have removed 2 things mid-attack and stayed alive at 4 life and done whatever. So I think we've all been in those situations in a game where, like, you've thought you could kill 2 players, so you send exactly the right amount of creatures at the 2 players, and then someone does something and stays alive at 4 life. Like, you're better off overkilling or kind of win-mooring sometimes to ensure that you can still win. And I think those kind of do that. I would be tempted to leave them in as well. Any thoughts on anything else here?
I like the rest of this. I like the Concordant Crossroads. That's that card you're going to drop when you have the amount of bodies to kill the table.
For sure. Karametra, we talked about that, but that interacts nicely with what the deck is doing with Field of the Dead. Mari's Wake is just always good in almost any deck, and especially where you're making tokens because it doubles as an anthem, doubles your mana. That's excellent. Nylea gives you some trample. That's always useful, and it's got an overrun built into it too. That's a good enchantment suite. The last one I want to touch on here a little bit myself is Allurin. Allurin's a very old card from Tempest, 2 green. Any player may play a creature card with total casting cost 3 or less whenever he or she could play an instant and without paying its mana cost. So I'm guessing what the goal here is to get in a situation with Allurin out and maybe say Cloudstone Curio or something, or even a creature over in a creature slot, which is White Mane Lion that has flash, and when it ETBs, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. So you're going to be able to, with Allurin out, just infinitely cast White Mane Lion to generate triggers off of Oketra. That seems like a really good way to make a gazillion zombies, and then you drop your Crossroads. Or your Cloudstone Curio, you can play one of your cheaper creatures and bounce it back to your hand, and then, replay it, bounce it. So there's loops there with Allurin as well. I just wanted to point out why Allurin was here in this deck specifically, because it's not a card you see a ton in EDH. Also, Glare of Subdual is a card I just took out of my Kenris deck. Tap an untapped creature you control to tap an artifact or a creature. So in this case, you got a bunch of tokens. You're going to tap those creatures to tap someone else's stuff down, either for value or to just, poke through with creatures you do have. So like if you make 4 zombies this turn they can't attack, you can still tap them and get blockers out of the way to get through the creatures that you can attack with. So it's a really, really good card in token decks. I was using it in Kenrith because I had exalted creatures I never attacked with, but Glare is one you don't see a ton. This is a solid deck for it too.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go over and take a look at instants next. There's 11 of them in this deck. There's Crop Rotation. There's Deglamour. Hey, that's a card we both like. Eladrami's Call, Enlightened Tutor, Generous Gift, Heroic Intervention, Return of the Wild Speaker, Rootborn Defenses, Shared Summons, Teferi's Protection, and Veil of Summer. So a couple removal spells here to Deglamour to deal with an artifact or enchantment, and it does a shuffle, which is always useful. Generous Gift, but no Beast Within. Generous Gift is functionally that for white. Veil of Summer and Teferi's Protection, along with Heroic Intervention to save yourself. And I have a really tough time building a white deck these days without Teferi's Protection and a green deck without Heroic Intervention. I mean, they're both so good. Return of the Wild Speaker, just really good value, either to buff your zombies in the swing or to, draw a few cards there. Rootborn Defenses, again, saves your stuff by making them all indestructible. And the Populate isn't nothing here either, getting a free zombie out of the deal. Any thoughts on anything here, Max?
I wish there was a Beast Within to go along with the Generous Gift. Just one more form of removal, but that's more my play style. Our local play style is pretty heavy on the targeted removal.
It also bothers me to, like, when there's two cards that are functionally the same, I want to run them both, and it feels like it makes me uncomfortable to look at a list and see Generous Gift and see that it can also run Beast Within and it's not running it. That's entirely me being a weirdo, but like, it does bother me. It bothers me to see a Cultivate and not see a Kadama's Reach. It bothers me to see Swords to Plowshares and not Path to Exile. It like functionally makes me uncomfortable. I expect that to be true of nobody else, but it's absolutely true of me.
I'm interested to know what Alex gets with shared summons. My guess is it's God Eternal, Ketra, and something.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if
I would guess maybe White Mane Lion, because you can just cast it and then bounce it to your hand and cast it again, so it's basically a gazillion. As long as you have mana, you can make 4/4 zombies.
Yeah. And, I mean, it is an instant. I kind of forgot about that because I was about to go on some tangent of how you're going to cast this and cast God Eternal, Ketra all in the same turn, but it's an instant, so never mind.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, it's not a card that I have in any of my decks, but I think that does make sense. Go grab a Ketra and White Mane Lion, end a turn. On your turn, drop a Ketra, and then you can probably still get a couple casts off White Mane Lion that turn, make a few 4/4s, and then if somebody doesn't deal with that very, very quickly, deal with that Ketra, when it comes back to you and you're fully untapped and have the White Mane Lion back in hand, you can drop, 10, 12, 14 zombies. Maybe not that many, I guess, because it's going to cost 2 each, but so you'll draw 5, 6, 7 zombies. And they're 4/4s. That's really tough to deal with.
Yeah, I find it interesting. There's no swords or path in this deck.
There aren't for removal.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a meta thing, but it isn't a lot of people that, I don't know, that are playing creatures that you care about. I mentioned I have a tough time not running Heroic Intervention. I have a tough time not running Swords and Path in white because they're just so efficient.
For sure.
And there's a couple tutors here too. Eldrami's Call is a good way to, again, probably go get that God Eternal Ketra. Enlightened Tutor can go get any of those enchantments like a Loren, probably, if you're in a position to do something abusive with that. It'll also get Karametra.
It also gets Cloudstone Curio.
Yeah, that's true. It'll get both. So if you're going to run a tutor in this deck, that's a good one to use.
Yeah.
I didn't really have any suggestions necessarily among the instants for things to add.
Yeah, I didn't either. It's more, tuning it to more my play style, like the Swords and Path,
for sure.
The Beast Within. I would probably add Worldly Tutor. You're running the 3 other ones. Add the last one, just add that 4th tutor. But that's my playstyle, especially because this deck is so heavily revolved around God Eternal Ketra.
Yeah, you do really, really need to have either a Ketra or Field of the Dead out.
Yeah.
Okay, Max, where do you want to go next?
Well, we did instants. Let's head over to sorceries.
Absolutely.
So there are 16 sorceries in the deck. We have Boundless Realms, Camaraderie, Catastrophe, Cleansing Nova, Harmonize, Hour of Promise, Hour of Reckoning, Nylea's Intervention, Pier's Whim, Reap and Sow, Scape Shift, Shamanic Rev, Splendid Reclamation, Sylvan Scrying, Tragic Arrogance, and Triumph of the Hordes.
So there is a lot of the land fetch kind of ramp spells, but they're not the usual ones you see that are cheap and efficient and grab a basic into play. They're the ones that specifically don't force you to get a certain kind of land. In other words, they're ones that let you go get Field of the Dead.
Yes.
And that's one more reason, I think, too, why Petrified Field is really, really useful, is because should somebody blow up your Field of the Dead and you don't have Petrified Field out, you can then use one of these go get any land tutors to get your Petrified Field to then get that Field of the Dead back into play. Any specific cards that you want to talk about because you think they're interesting?
I'm interested in Camaraderie here. So it's 4 green and a white. You gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures you control, and then creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. I want to know how well this works.
I'm curious too, because it feels like a card that you only really get good value out of when you're at a point when you can maybe win.
Yeah.
And then do you care if you're at that point, like where you have, 8 or 10 zombies out or something? Yeah, you get to draw, 8 or 10 cards or whatever it is. But do you need them at that point if you're going to overrun people with that many big zombies?
Right, and it also doesn't grant trample, so you need to have Nylea out or another overrun type effect already on the board. I would like to hear the feedback on this card.
Yeah, I kind of would too, because I don't think it's a bad card. I'm having a tough time mentally visualizing it, how effective it is.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Catastrophe is a unique old card from Urza's Saga. It's 4 white to destroy all creatures or all lands, and then creatures destroyed this way can't be regenerated.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen that in an actual deck before.
My only guess is this is like you cast this, you destroy all lands, and then you can figure out a way to you cast Splendid Wreck or something to bring everything back to make a bunch of zombies on top of what you already have.
Yeah, I would guess. That's what I would assume is happening. You're treating it like a expensive Wrath of God, unless you happen to have Splendor Reclamation in hand, in which case then you're gonna win.
Right.
Or Heroic Intervention maybe too. Maybe you're gonna cast it with Heroic Intervention in hand and make yourself indestructible and survive that the land destruction too, and then just be so far ahead of everybody else you're gonna win anyway. I don't know. Which makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Hour of Promise, really good card, and actually makes sense here as well, just beyond the fact that it goes and gets you that Field of the Dead, or it goes and gets you something else you need to interact with it. If you control 3 or more deserts, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. I guess I didn't look to see if there were even deserts in here.
I do not see any of the deserts,
okay.
So there are no, the 2 deserts clause does not apply.
Scavenger Grounds, I guess, is the only one,
is
right?
the only one, yep.
So theoretically, it would be one more zombie maker, but it isn't because there's not enough deserts.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would be probably worth it to put 2 more deserts in here just to go get with it on the off chance you could make one. But being able to go get the Field of the Dead seems like a really useful thing to do. So
yeah.
And for other ones here, Reap and Sow lets you go get a land or destroy a land, or both if you entwine it. Scape Shift obviously just combos nicely with all the things that you're doing. Sylvan Scrying goes and gets you a land of any type. Nylea's Intervention does as well, 2 lands to hand, and obviously Pierce Whim is a card we've been a big fan of for a while, and that's any land as well. So all good ways to get Field of the Dead. Triumph of the Hordes. I mean, it's a win condition when you have a bunch of tokens out.
Oh, for sure. +1/+1, Infect and Trample.
My only thought about that sometimes, I'm not sure if I want to, if win more is the right word for it. I almost feel like Overwhelming Stampede is going to win the game more consistently. It's really tough to kill the entire table with Triumph of the Hordes, unless you're really, really going wide. If the deck is making enough zombie tokens, you're probably, to kill the table, you're probably making so many, like infinite amounts, that I don't know if Triumph makes a difference. Whereas Overwhelming Stampede, because Triumph only gives them +1/+1 and trample, and it's relatively easy to soak that damage up on 2/2 zombies. I guess it's different if they're 5/5s off of Ketra. But there are some creatures in here that do have decent sized bodies, that have 3 or 4 power bodies, so Overwhelming Stampede might buff them enough that it's easier to kill people. I guess I'm not entirely sure either way. What do you think?
I would run them both.
Okay.
I agree with what you're saying. A lot of the majority of the bodies that aren't tokens are quite small. They're 1/3s or 2/4s or something like that. There are a handful of 4 or 5 power creatures in here. There are also creatures that give anthems. So like there's Elish Norn and a Thunderfoot Baloth. But I mean, so I see where both kind of can play in. I think both aren't great when you don't have a big body out. So if you're just giving a bunch of 1/1s, +1/+1, trample and effect, you're probably not getting through unless the board state is empty for whatever reason.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily even do one or the other. I just would be very tempted to run Triumph and Stampede, and maybe even Overrun as well.
I don't know if you need 3 because you have Nylea that can do it, and a couple other creatures that have it built in. But I would definitely run both of them, Overwhelming Stampede and Triumph.
Yeah, I don't think that's would be wrong necessarily.
Right.
Anything else here you want to mention?
I'm not a fan of Hour of Reckoning.
Okay.
This is 7 mana, 4 triple white for a sorcery that destroys all non-token creatures, but it has Convoke. So you can tap your tokens or tap your non-token creatures that are going to get destroyed and, cast it. So it should really only cost you nothing. Or 3 white mana, I guess. Oh no, or 1 of any mana of that creature's colors. So let's see, does Oketra make white zombies?
It does not, they're black zombies.
They're black. And Field of the Dead, I believe, is black. So you need some normal bodies out there to convoke it for the white pips, but you could just pay the 3, I guess.
Yeah.
I get this probably is backbreaking if no one else is running a token deck. But these days, a lot of stuff makes tokens on entry.
Right.
Whether it's Thopters or Servos or, cats or whatever. So depending on who you're facing against, maybe this is a huge just ends the game, or it's something that doesn't do much, and that's where I would put Overwhelming Stampede.
Okay. I can kind of see that. I don't dislike it, but it's also a card I've seen be underwhelming sometimes where someone's casting a token deck and they save 3 or 4 tokens, and I feel like, okay, well, I'm much less scared of those 3 or 4 tokens that survived that board wipe than I am what you might have done casting a Wrath of God for 4 only or something and been able to use the mana to cast something else that turn. I think it's a bad card, but I've never really necessarily loved it when I've seen it cast either.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's all I have for sorceries. Should we talk about creatures?
Last but not least, let's talk about the Creech.
We've got 21 in this deck, and that's, I guess, just creatures. There's a couple enchantment creatures that we mentioned earlier as well, so that would be 24 total if we count those. There's Craven Caryatid, Crashing Drawbridge, way to give your entire team haste. Elish Norn, Grand Cenobite, so, Elish Norn's never bad in any deck.
No, never.
Elvish Reclaimer, I like Elvish Reclaimer a lot here. It's a 1/2 for 2 mana. It gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard, which is kind of not that big of a deal. Occasionally it's a 3/3 for 1. The important part here is you can spend 2 to sacrifice a land and search your library for a land card and put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So it's a hero on a creature, but it's at instant speed, so it'll get you the landfall triggers you want for Field of the Dead. It'll get Field of the Dead itself if you don't have Field of the Dead out, and it will get the Petrified Field if he puts it in this deck to bring back your Field of the Dead if you happen to have it in the graveyard and need to get it back. So I like Reclaimer a lot here, and it's also one more reason I think to run Petrified Field. Elvish Visionary is just some value, ETBs, and draw a card, and that's probably a really good creature to mass bounce back if you're doing Alurin or Cloudstone Curio shenanigans to generate tokens off the catcher, or even just to do it without a catcher out is probably worth it if you're going to bounce that 3 times in a turn and draw 3 cards. Amiria Shepherd, some landfall synergy here that does some recursion. That's always useful. Eternal Witness, more recursion, always useful, and it's a good bounce target if you are going to be doing bounce or exile shenanigans with Fiend Hunter, which is next on the list. Fleetfoot Panther with Flash, and it lets you bounce creatures, so more of kind of the Karametra looking package. Also interacts nicely with God Eternal Aketra, who's next on the list, because Aketra makes zombies based on you casting a creature spell. So cast that Panther, bounce on Visionary, recast Visionary, draw a card, make some more zombies. That's all good. Core Skyfisher, efficient flyer, and does some more bounce stuff. Oran Frostfang, attacking creatures get Death Touch, which is always useful, and it's a draw engine. And it's just a really good card, 2/6 for 5 mana, that does a lot of useful things. Excavator, we mentioned before, way to get a land back from your graveyard. Rexage, just a body that destroys an artifact or enchantment on ETB, but it's one more good thing you can do your mass bounce shenanigans with here to take out someone's entire field of artifacts or enchantments. Sakura Tribe Elder, some more ways to go get a land on a body. Sylvan Caryatid, just a good creature to throw in to everyone's way. Thunderfoot Baloff is a way to give other creatures you control +2/+2 and trample if you happen to have your commander out. So kind of an overrun effect right there. Wall of Blossoms, ETBs, and draws a card for a mere 2 mana. So one more thing you can mass bounce and get some good value. Same with Wall of Omens. Weathered Wayfarer lets you tap for 1 and search your library for a land card. So again, go get that Field of the Dead or that Petrified Field, which I keep pushing like I own stock in Petrified Fields or something, but I think it's a good fit here. And last, White Mane Lion, which ETBs and does some bounce stuff. All creatures and things that make sense in this really specific deck.
Yes.
The one I thought I would mention here is possibly Knight of the Reliquary, which is kind of an old standard classic. It gets +1/+1 for each land card in your graveyard. So in this deck, that might pretty often come into play as a 6/6 or a 7/7 or even bigger than that, just for the 3 mana you spent casting it. And the fact that you can tap it to sacrifice a forest or a plains to search your library for a land card to put onto the battlefield. It's a 1 more landfall effect to trigger off Field of the Dead. It's 1 more way to go get Field of the Dead if you need to, or go get the Petrified Field. I think that would be a really good fit here. I think you have a couple you wanted to mention, Max.
I do. So my first one, we have Fiend Hunter here, you mentioned earlier. I think Palace Jailer might just be a better card in this situation. So it's 1 more mana, it's 2 white, When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. So there's some draw, and if you have an army of tokens, people probably aren't getting through. And then when Palace Jailer enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until an opponent becomes the monarch. So it's not a leaves the battlefield trigger, so you can bounce this, doing your Cloudstone shenanigans as much as you want and exile a bunch of stuff.
Yes, that's true. It doesn't quite replace Fiend Hunter because Fiend Hunter can hit your own stuff.
Right.
So I would guess with Fiend Hunter he's doing some flicker shenanigans, but the point you just made about how you can bounce it a bunch of times and get rid of a bunch of things is really good. I don't know if I would replace Fiend Hunter, but I think it would be a good fit just in the deck in addition to Fiend Hunter. That's a good call.
So my next one is a way to keep God Eternal Catcher alive, since, there's no Greaves, there's no Boots, there's really no overall hexproof except for those instants we covered earlier. I would put a Sylvan Safekeeper in this deck. It's 1 mana, and you can sacrifice a land, and target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. Knowing that we recommended putting Crucible in here, there's a Ramanap Excavator in here. It's just a way to be able to ditch a land maybe you don't need right now because it's tapped, protect God Eternal Ketra, and then bring that land back for your land for turn off of Field of the Dead. Crucible Worlds are Ramanap Excavator.
Even if, we mentioned this before about a different card, but again, if you're desperate, I have no land in my hand this turn, it just gives you a way to get a landfall trigger just by sacrificing something randomly to put it in your graveyard, and then replay it with the Excavator or the Crucible just to get a landfall trigger. Even if you're not protecting your commander because you need to, there's a little bit of synergy there. It's not going to happen very often, but that kind of dumb thing does come up in games.
Right.
What were your last two? I think you had 2 cards that are kind of similar here.
Yes. So my last 2 are very similar. They are Grand Abolisher and Docin of the Falling Leaf. These 2 basically just make it so people can't do stuff on your turn. Grand Abolisher is double white to cast, and Docin is 1 double green. I think it's just a way to make sure you can do what you need to do on your turn without anybody interrupting maybe a combo or just that chain of looping, bouncing stuff.
Any way to protect this deck, I think, is pretty useful, particularly because it's, I don't know if fragile is the right word, but you're so reliant on a couple of key pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Any way to keep people from interacting with those while you're doing your thing is probably a pretty good idea.
Right.
So yeah, those would be reasonable as well.
That is all I had.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, for sharing this deck with us and for supporting us on Patreon. It does mean a lot. And I think this is maybe one of the most unique decks we've definitely had in a long time.
Yeah, I think the last time we had a deck this unique was the mono green artifact Ayula deck we had, about 6 months ago.
The 2 that popped to mind were that and Shirtless Bear Fighter.
Oh, yeah.
So
way back in the day.
A lofty bit of company to keep. I like the idea a lot. It's super tricky, but I really appreciate people going out of their way to find strange and unusual builds like this. And this also would have been the kind of easy thing to do, maybe using Golos or something.
Oh, yeah.
And instead went a much more challenging route here, so I totally appreciate that.
Yeah, I definitely like it's much more challenging than just some generic 5-color commander.
Yes, for sure. All right. That will wrap up this Decks We Play. I am Dana Roach. You can find me on the Twitterbirds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. You can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show was edited by Rafael Garcia, and you can find him on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We'll be back on Monday with another show. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.